So we're here today with John Bursill. Now you're from an organisation known as...
Okay, I represent two organisations here today, Truth Action Australia and 911oz.com.
Right. And you've got a conference on tonight, have you?
No, we've got a film screening of Loose Change American Coup that's showing here at the Neighbourhood Centre. Loose Change 9/11 American Coup. It's the latest in, it's the fourth in a series of films that have been provided by activists in the United States. And this latest one is like basically getting it down to a focus on only what the evidence clearly shows. No conspiracy theory, no speculation, simply what we know for a fact. Okay, so that's the idea of this film.
Now, I've been listening to you on the microphone for a couple of minutes, and one of the things that you've been mentioning is you've got a lot of architects and engineers who are saying...
Yeah, there's 900 today. There's 955 architects and engineers that question the events of 9/11.
Now, they're saying that it was a controlled demolition.
They are.
One of the things I guess I would be saying if it was a controlled demolition, the people I've heard speak who are in this particular sort of game, bringing down buildings, they're usually vacant buildings.
Yep, that's correct.
Takes them a long time to set up.
Normally about a month, 2 months to set up, and they normally have to cut about 80% of the columns with oxyacetylene torches before they plant the explosives and then bring down the tower or the buildings. That's
so
right.
How would you explain the fact that they were able to set this massive operation up in buildings that were occupied throughout for a long while? Not occupied.
That's true.
How did they go about setting up that controlled demolition without anyone knowing?
Well, first of all, that's a very good question, and as a member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, our answer to that question is that we need a new investigation. We now have clear evidence that Building 7 was a controlled demolition. Now, do you understand that Building 7 fell for 2.2 seconds at pure freefall, as if you dropped an apple off the roof, it fell that fast?
You don't have answers to all these questions. That's what you're sort of saying. You don't... If someone, like, what happened to the passengers on the plane?
Well, the planes hit the buildings, didn't they?
Well,
didn't they die?
Conspiracy theorists will say that they were actually planes.
I'll give you some idea about exactly what this campaign's all about. There is disinformation and there is information and everything, isn't there? Okay, now, if 9/11 was a contrived plot to send us to war, do you think that maybe people with inside those groups of people might put out some bad ideas out there? Like, I've heard ideas about holograms hitting the buildings. I've heard ideas about all sorts of things. What do I think? I think that a plane hit the Pentagon. I think the planes hit both the buildings. That's what architects and engineers think. Okay, that's what serious, credible people think. Now, it's taken a lot of us a long time to get involved in this campaign because there was a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there. But now we're narrowing the focus, like this film tonight, just to the stuff that we can prove that we know is wrong. We know that the buildings, even the Twin Towers, okay, you said to me, okay, how do they get access, blah, blah, blah. This year, in April, there was a paper produced by Niels Harrit, Dr. Stephen Jones, who's coming to a conference next week in this country, that has found unexploded explosive ordnance, nanothermite throughout all the dust, consistently, and the consistency of the nanothermite is perfect. It is produced, obviously, in a high-tech laboratory. At 430 degrees, it becomes explosive and super hot. It burns at 2,500 degrees and explodes like TNT. Now, this is throughout all the dust. Then we had the byproducts of this explosive, which is a spherical iron, which is admitted by NIST that there is spheres of iron throughout all the dust. How did we get an iron sphere into the dust? First of all, to form a sphere, we must have a molten liquid, and then we must spray it into the air so that the surface tension can form a sphere. Okay, so how do we get molten iron spheres throughout all the dust? It's never been explained. If we ask the government, we say, we've found evidence of explosives in the dust that we've received through people that had the buildings collapse onto their apartment blocks and people in the street that gathered the dust, and we have the official research that's been done. They all show evidence of this high temperature. How do we get these high temperatures of 1,600 degrees, 1,600 degrees, when we only have office fires of 200, 300, 400 degrees? How do we do that?
An explosion of an aircraft with jet fuel.
Absolutely.
Surely that...
Let's do what we did before. Let's go back to what NIST says. NIST says that the jet fuel burnt off in the first 10 minutes. All it did was ignite the rest of the material in the building, and it burnt off in 10 minutes. That's what they say. Now, you can't heat structural steel beams up in 10 minutes. It takes many, many, many hours to do so, okay? So all it really did was allow the ignition. Now, we know that around about 10 columns out of the 47 steel core columns, the massive 2 feet by 1 feet columns that went all the way to the top, in continuous lengths that were all welded together and joined together, okay, that about 10 of those were damaged. Okay, we know that the buildings were specifically built to take the impact of a 707, a 4-engine aircraft, similar weight to a 767. They were built to take those impacts. We know from the swaying of the building, the oscillation of the building, that it was still structurally intact.
707 aircraft.
No, they weren't.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're looking at what you got a trip? You got a what were they? A 7.
You've got, rather than 767, rather than having 2 engines of about 7 or 8 tons, we had 4 engines of about 6 tons. Okay, so the engines are the ones that take the columns out. Okay, so there's more chance of losing more columns with the 707. The 707 structure is heavier and the aircraft flies faster. But the momentum, if you look at the average cruise speed of the 767 and the 707, you find that the momentum is pretty much exactly the same. So it's only a fine difference. There's no point in negating that.
But I mean, we're talking about an aircraft that was at full speed.
I'm just telling you what the NIST said, that the building was damaged. Around about 10 columns were lost in that core of 47. The building is built to probably handle about 2/3 to double its load at any one place at any given time. Well, some buildings are built to handle 2 and 3 times the maximum weight of the building. Right? They're always built much stronger than they need to be. So if we have a situation where we've only lost, what are we looking at? Say 20% of the columns in the internals of the core. We've lost maybe 50% of the columns on one side of the building. Okay, we still have a massive structure there. Now, how do we turn that to dust in 10 seconds? Do you want me to talk about what David Leifer has investigated? The doctor at Sydney University, the facilities manager there. Did you want me to tell you about his research?
What I would like to ask, okay, if you were saying before that you believe that the aircrafts were flown into the building.
Absolutely. Well, didn't we see them fly into the building?
Well,
didn't we see the damage?
If that is the case, and the objective was to show that America was under a terrorist attack, and we want to keep it, obviously in a plan like this, there's no point complicating it more. You'd want to keep it fairly simple. Why would you need to go to the trouble of collapsing the buildings? Isn't it sufficient enough to have 4 aircraft hijacked, 2 of them flying into 2 of the largest buildings in the world? Isn't that going to have a sufficient impact? Why go to the trouble then of going to...
We still don't know why there was explosives in the building and why they fell down it. So why would we move on to that question when we haven't found out what happened at the towers? Why did NIST produce a 10,000-page report about the building collapse of the Twin Towers and not spend 1 page to explain the collapse? They only came to the point of the pre-collapse theory.
But why
is that?
But why would you do that?
Why would I do that? Do you want me to imagine that I'm an evil neocon that wants to go to war? Well, maybe it would be because someone was going to make a lot of money out of the buildings coming down, like Larry Silverstein was going to make billions of dollars from an insurance policy he took out 6 weeks before the event.
But you drive
maybe I'd
this plan now. I mean,
why would I do it from a world perspective? Now, if I was thinking up a Hollywood plot and I wanted to really infect the world with fear so that we could do whatever we liked for an era of war and make a lot of money, maybe I'd think about doing something very iconic. If I fly 2 767s into the towers and they see them hit the building and they go, wow, geez, but look at our buildings, they're still standing. Now, if I turn those buildings to dust in 10 seconds, do you think that might shock a few people? Would that make you feel vulnerable?
I think the shock of the planes actually flying...
So you don't think the building's turning to dust and explode? Can I? Okay, I just wanted to show you these pictures here. Now, if we look at these pictures, okay, and we imagine they were sitting on the ground, we didn't have the building below. What do you see there? Now, I was in the military for quite a few years. That looks like a 500-pound bomb going off to me. Looks like an explosion. Did you know that some of these girders, around 5-10 tons, were ejected sideways at 100 kilometres an hour and embedded themselves into buildings 400-500 feet away? Does that seem a little bit unusual to you? Do you know that on the day that the news broadcasters were saying, how did they get the bombs in the building? Did you know that the FBI, the week after 9/11, was investigating the bomb reports that they had from all the firefighters that said there was bombs in the building? Did you know that many witnesses reported flashes of light? Many witnesses reported explosions that blew them out of floors in the building and down lift wells. Firefighters reported the lift wells were collapsing hundreds of feet below where the plane hit.
But people don't.
How do we explain that?
But people think things like, I mean, if you hear a car backfiring, you think it's a gunshot. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
People react differently to noises.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. You know? I mean, there's a big difference between a boom explosion and a boom from a backfire. Okay. These people specifically said the ground moved. There was a flash of light. Kaboom! A big explosion. These are the words they're using. 110 firefighters use those exact terms to describe explosions in the building.